It all began like any other morning. The city hummed with the rhythm of life, cars rushing past, phones buzzing, and people moving in hurried waves. But for her, today wasn't about chaos. Today was supposed to be simple, quiet, predictable. The CEO, a woman who had built her empire with grit and brilliance, stepped out of her car, dressed with quiet elegance. A tailored suit, sharp heels that clicked against the polished floor, and a calm aura that spoke of confidence earned through years of hard battles. She wasn't walking into a stranger's place, no, this was her bank, her creation, her pride, her second home. And as the glass doors slid open, a warm draft of conditioned air wrapped around her like a silent welcome. From the outside, it looked like any ordinary day. Staff at their counters, customers filling out slips, the sound of printers humming in the background. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening, yet beneath the surface, the day was holding its breath. She walked with purpose, the way only leaders do. Heads turned, though not everyone recognized her. Some employees smiled politely, assuming she was just another high-profile client. Others, too wrapped up in their work, barely noticed. In her mind, she wasn't here to inspect, or to manage, or to give speeches. No, she was here for something simple. A routine cash withdrawal. Something anyone could do. She glanced around, noticing the little details. The faint scent of fresh coffee near the reception desk. The nervous tapping of a young teller as he counted notes. The hum of the security cameras above. Everything felt normal, but there was an inertia, a subtle tension that she couldn't quite put her finger on. "Good morning," she said softly to a teller, sliding a slip of paper across the counter. The teller smiled, her hands moving quickly. "Good morning, ma'am. How much would you like to withdraw today?" The CEO gave a number. Not extravagant, not unusual, just enough for personal use. The teller nodded, but for a split second, just a flicker, there was hesitation. A pause so brief, it could have been missed. The kind of pause that doesn't make sense until later. The CEO noticed, but brushed it aside. She had no reason to expect resistance. After all, this was her bank. Narrator voice grows subtle, almost whispering, but sometimes, the days that start in perfect rhythm are the ones that shatter the hardest. Because while she stood there, expecting a smooth transaction, gears were already turning in the background. Doubts were forming, questions were being whispered, and a storm was silently brewing behind the counter. She waited patiently, her phone in hand, scrolling through emails. Around her, the branch buzzed with routine energy. A mother filling out a deposit slip with her child tugging at her coat. A businessman nervously checking his watch. An elderly man smiling at the security guard as they exchanged small talk. To everyone else, this was an ordinary Tuesday. But for her, this day was about to carve itself into memory. She tapped her fingers lightly against the counter. The minutes stretched longer than they should have. Something in the atmosphere was shifting. And then, she noticed it again, the quick exchange of glances between tellers. The hushed tone of their voices, the subtle tension stiffening the air. It wasn't paranoia. It was real. She straightened her posture, her natural instinct for leadership rising. The calm in her eyes turned sharper. "Is there a problem?" she asked gently, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who doesn't usually need to repeat herself. The teller froze for a second before responding. One moment, ma'am, I'll just get the manager." And just like that, the mood of the room shifted. The CEO's gaze followed the teller as she disappeared into an office. Conversations at nearby counters blurred into background noise. Her intuition whispered louder now. Something isn't right. She exhaled slowly, grounding herself. Years of business negotiations, boardroom battles, and crises had taught her patience. But even with all that experience, she couldn't shake the strange sensation crawling up her spine. This wasn't how her day was supposed to go. The sound of footsteps echoed as the branch manager began to walk toward her, his pace steady, his expression unreadable. She glanced down at her phone again, pretending to check a message, but her mind was focused elsewhere. She was already preparing herself for what might come next. And as the manager approached, the ordinary day she had expected was gone. In its place stood the first spark of a confrontation that would change everything. It should have been simple. A slip of paper, a polite greeting, a count of crisp bills handed over the counter. That's how it was supposed to go. But instead, the room grew heavier with every passing second. As though invisible eyes were watching, waiting for something to unfold. The CEO stood calmly, her presence commanding, even in silence. She was used to people recognizing her authority immediately. Yet here, in this branch, her own branch, there was only hesitation. The teller returned, offering a tight smile. "Thank you for waiting. Ma'am, can you confirm the withdrawal amount again?" The CEO repeated the number. Not a fortune, not suspicious, just ordinary cash. The kind of request made 100 times a day in this very building. But the teller's hands slowed. Her eyes flickered toward another employee across the room. A small, almost unnoticeable shake of the head. Something was wrong. "Is there a problem?" the CEO asked. Her tone measured but firm. The teller cleared her throat. "It's just a larger amount than we usually process right away. We'll need additional verification." The words were careful, but the tone betrayed unease. The The CEO could feel it like a thread pulling tighter and tighter. Her eyebrow arched. Verification. This is my account. My name is right there. You have my signature, my ID, my card. What more do you need? The teller hesitated again. The silence behind the counter stretched uncomfortably, long enough for nearby customers to notice. From across the room, whispers began. People craned their necks subtly, sensing drama but pretending not to. The mother with her child stopped filling out her slip. The businessman glanced up from his phone. The branch no longer buzzed with routine. It held its breath. The teller's hands fidgeted with the keyboard. "One moment, ma'am. Let me just check with my supervisor." And there it was, the second deflection. The simple request was no longer simple. The CEO inhaled slowly, trying to keep her composure. Inside, however, the first sparks of anger stirred. Not because of the delay, but because of the way she was being treated like a stranger. Like someone who didn't belong. Her mind replayed the small things, the exchanged glances, the unnecessary hesitation, the forced smiles. It wasn't about the money. It was about doubt, suspicion, disrespect, and the room seemed to grow colder by the minute. She leaned closer to the counter, her voice low, controlled. "Listen carefully. I know exactly how this process works. I've been in banking long enough to understand every step. So I'll ask again. Is there a problem?" The teller froze, caught between duty and fear. She muttered quietly, "Our manager will explain." The CEO straightened, her jaw tightening. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than words. And yet, deep inside, she felt it, the sting of being questioned in a place that should have recognized her without hesitation. The insult wasn't obvious. Not yet, but it was growing, like a shadow stretching across the floor. Minutes ticked by. Every second felt like an eternity. She could feel eyes on her now. Customers pretending to look away, but stealing glances. The atmosphere had shifted from ordinary to charged. Almost electric. A simple request for cash had turned into a spectacle. Then, from the corner office, the figure of the branch manager appeared. He walked with slow, deliberate steps. His face carrying an air of authority that wasn't welcoming, it was challenging. The CEO didn't move. She stood firm, her gaze locked forward, ready for the next chapter of this confrontation. Because in that moment, she understood, this wasn't just hesitation. This was resistance. And resistance, in her own bank, was something she would not tolerate. The lobby doors creaked open, and the atmosphere shifted. A tall man in a tailored suit strode across the floor, polished shoes clicking against marble like a judge entering his court. His expression was sharp, his chin tilted high, and his voice carried before he even reached the counter. "What seems to be the problem here?" The staff almost sighed in relief. The customers turned, curious, and AngelaRhodes.com, but alert, realized the storm she sensed earlier had just arrived. The teller quickly explained, her words rushed and nervous. "This woman is requesting a large cash withdrawal, but there's an issue with verification." Angela cut in, her tone measured. "There is no issue. The account is mine. The identification is mine. All I asked for was access to my own money." The manager's eyes scanned her from head to toe. Not with the precision of a banker, but with the suspicion of a guard questioning an intruder. He crossed his arms. "Let me see that ID again." Angela handed it over, steady and unflinching. He studied it, tilting his head, lips curling into the faintest smirk. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "You expect me to believe you're Dr. Angela Rhodes, the CEO of this institution?" The words hung in the air like poison. Customers glanced at one another, whispering. A few frowned, sensing the insult embedded in his tone. Angela's eyes narrowed. "That's exactly what I expect you to believe, because it's the truth." But the manager chuckled, shaking his head as though she were a child telling a fairy tale. "You'll have to forgive me," he said, his voice dripping with mock courtesy, "but it's hard to reconcile. A CEO of your background walking in here, asking for this much cash, without prior notice. It doesn't add up." The words "your background" echoed in the lobby, carrying a weight everyone understood. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about procedure. It was about her. The young businessman in line shifted uncomfortably. The mother hugged her child tighter, and Angela felt the simmer of anger rise not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been dismissed with those same coded words. She leaned forward, her voice steady as steel. "What doesn't add up is your attitude. What doesn't add up is your arrogance. My credentials are valid, my account is active, and your only job is to honor that. So tell me, what exactly are you questioning?" For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his face, but he masked it quickly, straightening his tie. "I'm questioning the legitimacy of this transaction," he said firmly, "and until I'm satisfied, you're not walking out of here with a single dollar." The room went still. Angela's calm facade hardened. She could feel the eyes of strangers on her, the judgment in the manager's tone, the tightening knot of injustice. He wasn't protecting the bank. He was protecting his ego. And in that moment, Angela understood. This was no longer just about a withdrawal. This was about dignity. This was about power. This was about being seen. The manager placed her ID on the counter as though it were tainted. If you really are who you say you are, you'll have no problem waiting until I call headquarters. I'm sure they'll clear this up one way or another. Angela stared at him, her silence sharper than any retort. The crowd whispered louder now, sensing the injustice unfolding before them. Some reached for their phones. Recording. The manager glanced around nervously, realizing eyes were on him, but his pride refused to bend. Instead, he puffed his chest and sneered. Until then, ma'am, you'll just have to wait. Angela's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the weight of choice. She could let this play out, endure the humiliation, or she could remind him, and everyone watching, exactly who she was. She picked up her ID with deliberate.com, slid it back into her wallet, and met his eyes with quiet fire. You've made your position very clear, she said softly. Now let me make mine. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. The manager smirked again, mistaking her poise for defeat. But Angela's voice carried differently, now stronger, sharper, and with a finality that hinted this story was about to take a dramatic turn. It was supposed to be a simple transaction, but inside that polished bank lobby, the air had turned into a theater of judgment. Every second Angela stood at the counter, denied and interrogated. The audience grew. Murmurs rose. Eyes lingered. Phones tilted discreetly to record. And in that instant, the woman who commanded boardrooms, who negotiated million-dollar contracts with ease, was made to feel like a trespasser in her own financial home. The manager leaned closer, his voice raised just enough for everyone to hear. I'm telling you again, ma'am, without proper clearance, you are not authorized to withdraw these funds. Angela's hands clenched at her side. My clearance is in your hand, she replied, her voice steady but sharp. You have my ID, my signature, and the account information. What else do you need? He gave a short, mocking laugh. What I need is proof that this account isn't fraudulent. Frankly, people try things like this all the time, and I don't care what story you spin until I'm satisfied. You're not getting a cent. The words dropped like a hammer, echoing through the silent lobby. A college student in line whispered, "That's not right." A mother with her toddler shook her head, whispering under her breath. She showed him her ID. Angela felt their stares. Some were sympathetic, some curious, some skeptical. But all of them witnessed something she had fought her entire life to rise above. Being treated as less than. The humiliation burned deeper with every second. Here she was, the CEO who had broken barriers in a world not built to welcome her, now reduced to proving her existence to a man whose authority ended at the lobby doors. The manager straightened his tie, clearly enjoying the performance. I don't know what game you're playing, but walking in here demanding large sums of cash, that's suspicious behavior. Angela's voice cracked not with weakness, but with contained fury. The only suspicious behavior I see here is yours. A gasp came from a woman sitting nearby. The confrontation was no longer private. It was public theater, and Angela was being forced into the role of defendant. The sting wasn't just the denial. It was the tone, the smirk, the way the manager deliberately emphasized each doubt. It was how he made sure every customer heard his suspicion. How he wanted to strip her power right there in front of strangers, and it worked. Because Angela could feel the heat in her chest, the flush in her cheeks. The humiliation wasn't imagined, it was on display. One older man finally spoke from the back. She's telling you the truth. You can't just deny someone their own money like that. But the manager waved him off. Eyes locked on Angela like a predator, unwilling to lose control. Sir, I am protecting this bank from fraud. That is my duty. Angela's eyes flicked around the room. Some people nodded in support. Others looked away, uncomfortable. And she realized something. This moment wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had ever been silenced, dismissed, or forced to justify their worth. The humiliation pressed down heavier than the marble pillars surrounding her. And yet, beneath it, something stirred in anger, a resolve. She straightened her back, no longer hiding the sting but owning it. She met his eyes and said slowly, "You're not protecting this bank. You're humiliating me, in front of everyone, and you know it." The lobby froze. Even the manager hesitated for a breath, but pride wouldn't let him stop. With a cold grin, he said the line that would come to haunt him. "Ma'am, you have no right to this account." The gasp was audible this time. Angela felt her stomach twist, not because his words carried truth but because of the way they diminished her in front of strangers. The sting of humiliation became more than personal, it became public property. The whispers grew louder. Someone muttered, "This is unbelievable." Another whispered, "She's going to sue him for this." Angela took a long breath. In her silence, the weight of the moment thickened. And though the humiliation burned, she was already planning her next move. Because humiliation is temporary. But consequences can be permanent. The silence after the manager's last words was deafening. Angela stood motionless, her chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate breaths. She had faced countless battles in her career, contracts that could collapse empires, boardrooms filled with doubters, but nothing compared to the sting of being dismissed in public by a man who thought arrogance equaled authority. Her voice broke the silence, calm but cutting. "Sir, I've been more than patient. You have my identification, my account details, and every proof you demanded. Yet you continue to treat me as if I don't belong here." The manager leaned back, folding his arms with smug satisfaction. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about patience. It's about protocol. And I decide when protocol has been met." The smirk on his face wasn't just confidence, it was a declaration. A declaration that he believed he was untouchable. That his authority inside these walls was absolute. Angela narrowed her eyes. Protocol does not give you the right to humiliate a client. But he only chuckled under his breath, loud enough for the nearby customers to hear. "Client," he mocked. "That's what you claim to be." The tension thickened. Every second was another thread pulling tighter around the room. Customers shifted uncomfortably, whispering, their eyes darting between Angela and the manager, like spectators at a boxing match. Angela tried again, her tone steadier, her words precise. "You are making a grave mistake. I am not just a client, here I am." But he interrupted, raising a hand like a judge silencing the accused. "Enough, I don't care who you say you are. People like you walk in here every week with stories, with excuses, with fake accounts. You're no different." The audacity in his words was a spark to dry tinder. Angela's calm began to tremble under the weight of rage she fought to contain, her hands pressed against the counter. Not in surrender, but in restraint. She could feel the fire rising inside her, the disbelief, the fury, the humiliation now boiling into something uncontrollable. A woman in line muttered softly, "This is too much." Another man shook his head, whispering, "He doesn't know who he's talking to." And yet the manager stood proud, basking in his own arrogance, certain that the ground he stood on was unshakable. Angela leaned forward, her voice low, each word deliberate. "You've questioned my identity. You've insulted me. You've refused to do your job. I've given you every chance to correct yourself. And still, you persist." The manager tilted his head, smirk deepening. "Because I'm not afraid of you. I run this branch. Not you, not anyone else. And no amount of complaining will change that." It was the moment arrogance crossed into outright defiance. And in that instant, the last traces of patience drained from Angela's eyes. The air around her shifted. The calm CEO who walked in earlier was gone. What stood there now was a woman pushed to the brink, a woman whose silence had been mistaken for weakness. Angela straightened her shoulders, her voice steady, yet carrying an edge sharp enough to cut through the smugness. "You may think you run this branch, but you have no idea who you're speaking to." The lobby went quiet again, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. Every customer felt it, the sense that something seismic was about to unfold. The manager chuckled one last time, oblivious to the shift. "Is that supposed to scare me? Because I assure you, nothing you say can touch me." Angela's eyes locked on his unwavering. "You're right about one thing. Words alone won't touch you, but actions will." The boiling point had been reached. The tension that simmered through humiliation and arrogance had finally erupted, and the next move Angela would make would change everything. The air was thick, almost electric. Angela's words hung between them like a loaded gun, ready to fire. The manager smirked, still convinced he had won this battle of wills. Customers leaned forward, their curiosity rising. Something in Angela's eyesteel.com unshakable hinted that the storm was only beginning. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a sleek leather folder. With deliberate precision, she laid it on the counter and flipped it open. Inside were documents, pristine and official, stamped with seals and signatures that left no room for doubt. Her voice, measured and commanding, cut through the murmurs. "You've spent the last 20 minutes questioning who I am. Let me make this very clear. My name is Angela Morris. I am not just a client here. I am the founder and chief executive officer of this bank." The words landed like a thunderclap. Gasps echoed across the lobby. A woman covered her mouth in shock. A man in line whispered, "Sit, she owns the bank." The teller who had first hesitated dropped his pen, his hands trembling. Even the security guard by the door stiffened, realizing he'd just witnessed the unmasking of true power. But the manager didn't move. He blinked, once, twice, then forced a chuckle. "Nice story," he said dismissively. "Anyone can print a fancy document. That doesn't mean it's real." The arrogance still lingered. Angela's gaze never wavered. She tapped the folder, sliding a business card across the counter. Black lettering, embossed in gold. Angela Morris, CEO and founder. The weight of that single card was heavier than any argument. Her voice grew sharper, her patience gone. "You doubted my account. You doubted my identity. And now, you dare doubt the very institution that signed your paycheck." The crowd stirred. Some nodded, some whispered, some shook their heads at the manager's reckless defiance. Angela straightened, her presence commanding the entire room. "I built this bank from the ground up. I know every policy, every protocol, every detail of how this institution operates. And yet, here I stand, denied access to my own money, humiliated in front of strangers. By my own employee." Each word hit like a hammer striking steel. The weight of truth crushed the atmosphere, leaving no escape for the manager. Still, he leaned forward, his smirk unbroken. "You expect me to believe you, without proof beyond some business card. Please, I've been in banking long enough to spot liars. And you, before he could finish, a woman stepped forward from the line. I've seen her before, she whispered. On the news. She was interviewed last month about expanding branches nationwide. That's her. She's the real deal. Another man pulled out his phone, searching quickly, then held up the screen. There she was, Angela Morris, photographed beside senators, cutting ribbons at grand openings, speaking at finance summits. The evidence was undeniable, though the whispers turned into certainty. The room knew, the customers knew, the staff knew, but the manager, he wasn't ready to admit defeat. Angela leaned in just slightly, her voice low but powerful enough to silence the crowd. I don't need to convince you. The truth is not up for debate. You've already made your choice. Sans sealed your fate. The manager swallowed, his confidence flickering for the first time. Yet still, he forced one last smirk, clinging desperately to control. You think a title makes you untouchable? I run this branch, not you, and you don't scare me. The silence that followed was chilling. Angela closed her folder slowly, each movement deliberate, signaling the end of his borrowed arrogance. Her words carried no anger, now just certainty. Oh, you should be scared, not because of who I am, but because of what comes next. The customers froze, holding their breath. The staff stood still, realizing the depth of the disaster unraveling before their eyes. This was no longer about cash. This was about dignity, respect, and consequences. Angela had revealed her true identity. The crowd believed, the staff believed, and finally, even the manager's eyes betrayed the truth. He knew he had crossed a line he could never return from. The manager still smirked, standing tall in his illusion of power. Angela, however, had gone silent. She stepped back from the counter, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor as she moved toward a quiet corner of the lobby. Customers followed her with their eyes. Sensing that something monumental was about to unfold, she took out her phone, her fingers calm, deliberate, unshaken. One by one, she made calls quick, precise, authoritative. To her assistant, to the regional director, to legal. Each voice on the other end responded with urgency, their tones shifting the moment they realized what was happening. It didn't take more than seconds for the chain reaction to begin. Meanwhile, the manager leaned toward the teller with a smug whisper. See, she's bluffing. No one powerful makes phone calls from a lobby. She's putting on a show. But his laugh was nervous now. The tremor in his voice betrayed him, even if he refused to admit it. Across the room, customers exchanged glances. They had seen the look in Angela's eyes, the look of someone not bluffing but executing. It was the quiet before a storm, and everyone but the manager could feel the thunder rolling closer. 5 minutes passed. The glass doors swung open. A suited man with a badge identifying him as regional director entered briskly, his face pale. He spotted Angela immediately and hurried over. Ms. Morris. I came as fast as I could, he said, his voice low, almost panicked. Is everything all right? Every head in the lobby turned. The customers who had doubted moments earlier now stared. The staff froze. The manager's smirk wavered. Angela simply nodded, her voice cool as ice. Not yet, but it will be. The regional director's gaze shifted toward the manager. His expression hardened instantly. You, he barked. Step aside. Right now, the manager blinked, taken aback. Wait, I'm running this branch. You can't just. But the director cut him off sharply. You have no idea who you've been speaking to. This woman is the CEO of this entire institution, the founder, the reason you even have a job. Gasps rippled again. A woman whispered, it's true. It's really her. The manager's face paled, but pride forced him to scoff. Even if she is, I was just following protocol. I was doing my job. Angela finally turned toward him, her calm demeanor steady as a blade. Your job was to serve clients with dignity and respect. Instead, you chose arrogance and prejudice. That is not protocol. That is failure. 8 minutes had passed. The tension reached its breaking point. The regional director stepped closer to the manager, lowering his voice but not his fury. You've embarrassed this institution. You've humiliated its leader. And you've done it publicly. Do you have any idea what that means? The manager opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time, his arrogance faltered, his confidence cracking under the weight of reality. Angela didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Instead, she checked her watch, then looked him in the eye. 10 minutes. That's all it takes to change a life. Yours just changed. At that exact moment, her assistant arrived, carrying a folder with paperwork already prepared. Termination documents. Finalized. Signed. Effective immediately. Angela accepted them without hesitation. She turned to the manager, her tone final. You're finished here. Collect your things. Security will escort you out. The manager's jaw dropped. You can't just fire me like this. But Angela's response was unwavering. I built this bank. I can remove anyone who endangers its values. And you, sir, just proved you don't belong here. 10 minutes had passed. The same customers who had watched Angela humiliated now witnessed her reclaim the room with unmatched authority. Some clapped quietly. Others stood in silent awe. The staff avoided her eyes, ashamed of their silence. their complicity. The manager, red-faced and defeated, was led away by security. His arrogance dissolved into desperation, but it was too late. The damage was done, and the verdict was final. Angela turned back toward the counter, her voice calm once more. Now, let's finish what I came here for. My withdrawal, please. The teller, hands trembling, nodded quickly. Yes, Ms. Maurice. Right away. In the span of 10 minutes, the balance of power had shifted entirely. Angela had walked in as a client and been treated as less than human. She walked out as a leader who reminded everyone never mistake .com for weakness, and never mistake patience for submission. The room fell into silence, so heavy it could be felt. The kind of silence where even the hum of the air conditioner seemed deafening. Seconds earlier, the branch manager had strutted with the arrogance of a man convinced of his own authority. Now, standing before the CEO of the very bank he worked for, that arrogance began to crumble. Angela Morris didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm authority carried more weight than any shouted command ever could. She held the termination papers in her hand like a final verdict. She spoke softly, but every word cut like steel. Effective immediately. Your employment with this institution is terminated. The words echoed through the marble lobby. Customers who had pretended to busy themselves with their phones now froze, watching history unfold in real time. Tellers behind the counter stood motionless, their eyes darting between their disgraced boss and the woman who had just dismantled him with one sentence. The manager laughed, a desperate, broken sound. This is ridiculous. You can't do this. You can't just walk in here. And Angela stepped closer, her eyes unblinking. I built this bank. My name is on every contract, every policy, every wall. If anyone in this building has the right to decide who belongs here, it's me. The manager's face flushed red, but his words faltered. His bravado drained from him, leaving only panic in its place. He looked around the lobby for support, but no one moved. Not a single teller, not a single customer, not even the security guard at the door, lifted a hand in his defense. The same man who had carried himself as untouchable now stood utterly alone. Angela's assistant stepped forward, handing her a pen. Without hesitation, she signed the final line of the termination form and closed the folder with a snap that carried across the room. Security, she said firmly. The guard approached, his hesitation obvious, but Angela nodded with reassurance. Please escort this man out of the building. He no longer represents us. The manager's voice cracked. With Angela, let's talk about this. I was just following procedure. It was nothing personal. Angela's response was steady, her tone unflinching. You mistreated me because you thought I was powerless. That wasn't procedure. That was prejudice, and prejudice has no place in this company. Her words cut deeper than the firing itself. The customers shifted uncomfortably, their eyes widening at the truth laid bare. They had witnessed the arrogance. They had heard the condescension. Now they were watching accountability in its purest form. The security guard gestured toward the exit. The manager resisted for a moment, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. You're making a mistake. I've given years to this branch. You'll regret this. Angela tilted her head slightly, her expression calm but unyielding. The only mistake was thinking authority gave you permission to disrespect people. Today, that mistake ends. The manager's fight collapsed. His shoulders sagged, his chest heaved, and for the first time, he looked small. Not powerful, not untouchable, just small. The guard guided him toward the doors, and as the heavy glass swung open, the sound of his shoes dragging against the polished floor echoed like a funeral march for his career. The moment he stepped outside, whispers filled the lobby. Some customers clapped quietly, others shook their heads in disbelief. A few employees lowered their eyes. Ashamed of having stood silently while their manager behaved as he did, Angela didn't gloat. She didn't smile. Her face remained composed, but her presence filled the entire space. She turned toward the staff, her voice calm but commanding. Let this be clear to everyone here. This bank was built on service, trust, and respect. No one, not even a manager, is above those values. If you forget them, you will no longer work here. Do I make myself clear? Every teller nodded quickly, voices overlapping in a chorus of yes. Ms. Morris, Angela softened, her tone shifting. Good, then let's move forward. Because what just happened here, what you all witnessed, is not a punishment. It's a reminder that no one should be treated as less than they are. One customer stepped forward, an older woman who had been watching quietly from the corner. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Ma'am, I've never seen anything like this. Thank you for standing up for yourself. And for people like me. Too many times, we're made to feel small in places like this. Angela reached out, gently taking the woman's hand. No one should ever feel small when they walk into a place that's meant to serve them. Not here, not anywhere. The woman's eyes glistened with tears, and the quiet applause that followed grew louder. For the first time, the branch lobby wasn't a place of humiliation. It was a place of justice. The tellers quickly processed Angela's request. The cash withdrawal that had sparked the entire ordeal was finally laid before her. Stacks of bills neatly arranged, handled with trembling care. Angela accepted it, sliding the envelope into her bag with a quiet nod. "Thank you. That's all I asked for when I walked in. Nothing more, nothing less." Her gaze swept across the lobby one last time. The customers who had once witnessed her humiliation now saw her triumph. The employees who had followed the wrong leader now stood reminded of the right one. And the man who believed himself untouchable had just learned how fragile arrogance could be. The firing had taken less than 10 minutes, but its impact would stretch far longer. This wasn't just the end of one man's career. It was the beginning of a story that would ripple through the entire company, and far beyond. The heavy glass doors closed behind the disgraced manager, and with them, the last echo of his arrogance faded into silence. For the first time since the confrontation began, the air inside the branch felt lighter. Yet all eyes remained fixed on Angela Morris. She had not only stood her ground, she had transformed the room itself. Angela drew in a steady breath, letting the silence linger just long enough to command attention. Then she turned, facing the staff lined up behind the counters, and the customers who still clutched their deposit slips, phones, and bags. Her voice was calm, but it carried a weight that filled every corner of the room. "What you all witnessed today was not just about me. It was about what this banquet, our institution, stands for: respect, service, integrity. These are not optional values. They are the foundation of everything we do." The tellers exchanged glances, some nodding, others looking down, guilt heavy on their faces. Angela didn't ignore their discomfort, she embraced it. "I know many of you felt helpless watching what happened earlier. I understand that, but let me be clear. Silence in the face of disrespect gives that disrespect power. From this moment on, I expect every one of you to remember that serving people with dignity is not just your job, it's your duty." Her words struck hard, but there was no anger in them. Instead, there was conviction. Conviction born not from humiliation, but from resolve. A customer, a young man in a suit who had been near the line, spoke hesitantly. "Ms. Morris, I've never seen a CEO do what you just did. Most would have walked away, called lawyers, or let someone else handle it. Why? Why did you choose to face it here, in front of all of us?" Angela's eyes softened, her expression shifting from firm authority to reflective honesty. "Because the fight for respect doesn't happen in boardrooms. It happens right here, where ordinary people are treated fairly or unfairly. If I allowed myself to be diminished here, in my own institution, what message would that send to every other person who walks through these doors? I chose to stand here because this is where change must begin." The lobby grew quiet again, but this time, the silence carried admiration. Customers leaned forward, hanging on her every word. Employees stood straighter, as though her courage had begun to seep into their own spines. Angela walked slowly toward the front of the lobby, her heels tapping against the polished floor. Each step was deliberate, measured, the sound almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat restoring order. This bank was built not to intimidate people, but to empower them. Every deposit slip, every withdrawal, every conversation at this counter represents trust. If we cannot protect that trust, then we do not deserve to exist. She turned back toward the staff, her gaze sweeping over each face. "I don't expect perfection. I don't expect you never to make mistakes. But I do expect awareness. I expect compassion. And most of all, I expect you to remember that behind every account number is a human being. Their story matters. Their dignity matters." The tellers nodded quickly, their nervous expressions melting into something The lesson had landed. Angela then shifted her focus to the customers. "I know some of you came here today simply to deposit a check or withdraw cash. Instead, you became witnesses to something bigger. And I hope what you take away from this is simple. If you ever feel small, overlooked, or disrespected, know that you have the right to stand tall. Not just because of who you are, but because no one has the right to make you feel less." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. One woman clapped softly, and soon others joined in, not a thunderous applause, but a steady, heartfelt rhythm that carried the weight of shared pride. Angela didn't smile widely. She didn't revel in the applause. Instead, she gave a small nod, her composure intact, her dignity unwavering. "Today could have ended in silence and humiliation," she said, her voice firm but warm. "But instead, it ends with clarity. We know what we stand for, and we know what we will never tolerate again." She paused, letting the words sink deep into the hearts of everyone listening. Then, with quiet finality, she added, "This bank is not just my legacy. It is our promise to each other. And to every person who steps inside, the tension that once choked the lobby was gone, replaced with something entirely different: pride." Customers left the branch with stories they would tell for years. Employees returned to their desks with a new sense of responsibility. And Angela Morris walked out not as someone who had been humiliated, but as someone who had turned that pain into power. The lesson was not just for her staff. It was for everyone. Respect. It's a simple word, yet one that carries the weight of history, struggle, and dignity. And in the aftermath of that unforgettable moment inside the bank lobby, the meaning of respect was no longer abstract. It had been carved into the minds of every witness, etched into the story that would soon ripple far beyond those polished walls. Angela Morris didn't set out that morning to make a statement. She came for something as ordinary as withdrawing cash. But life has a way of turning ordinary moments into defining battles. And when prejudice tried to shrink her, she chose to risk transforming humiliation into justice, and injustice into a lesson the world would not forget. The echoes of her decision traveled quickly. Customers who had been present shared the story with family, with friends, with colleagues. Employees whispered about it behind counters and over lunch breaks. Soon, the event became more than a personal confrontation. It became a symbol that reminded everyone watching, power without respect is fragile, but respect, once claimed, is unshakable. Angela herself reflected deeply in the hours after the incident. Sitting in her office, away from the stares and the noise, she looked at the framed photographs on her wall. Images of the bank's grand opening, the ribbon-cutting ceremony, the smiling faces of employees who had believed in her vision. This, she whispered softly to herself, is why we built this. Not for titles, not for power, but to make sure no one ever walks through these doors and feels less than who they are. Her words weren't just for her. They were for every young professional who had ever been underestimated, for every customer who had ever been spoken down to, for every person who had ever been judged before being respected. The moral of the story was clear. Prejudice has consequences. The manager thought he was untouchable, hiding behind arrogance and authority, but his downfall showed a truth as old as time: when arrogance collides with integrity, arrogance always loses. For the customers, it was a reminder that silence is never neutral. They had witnessed firsthand how one voice, firm and unyielding, could shift the entire balance of power. For the staff, it was a lesson that every choice they made, every glance, every hesitation, every word either honored or betrayed the mission of the institution they served. Angela didn't relish the firing. She didn't celebrate the man's downfall. Instead, she carried herself with the same quiet dignity that had defined her from the start. Because this story wasn't about revenge, it was about restoration, restoring her right to dignity, restoring the trust of the people watching, restoring the principle that respect cannot be given selectively, it must be universal, constant, and uncompromising. Later, when reporters asked her about that day, she said something that would resonate far beyond the walls of her bank. Respect is not negotiable. Titles don't guarantee it. Wealth doesn't buy it. Skin color should never determine it. Respect is a basic human right, and when it's denied, we must have the courage to stand up, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who cannot. Her words weren't just quoted in headlines. They were printed, reposted, and repeated like a mantra. And for many, they became a spark, a reminder that resilience isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about standing in the storm, even when the storm tries to silence you. The moral of power and respect is not about one CEO or one manager. It's about the world we choose to create. A world where authority is accountable. A world where dignity is defended. A world where no one has to prove their worth to simply be treated with fairness. Angela's story was a reminder that true power doesn't come from titles or corner offices. It comes from the courage to demand respect when it matters most. As the chapter closed, one truth remained unshakable. Respect denied is not respect lost. It is respect waiting to be reclaimed by those brave enough to stand tall. And Angela Morris had stood taller than ever.